Hello, and welcome to my first ever tutorial series on this channel. Now, I have done tutorials on this channel before, like I did a couple follow-up tutorials to Blender Guru's Donut series, which is an excellent series you should watch. I also did a couple Let's Help a Stranger videos where I basically do, one of bespoke tutorials trying to help someone online. But this will be my first 100% Scratch tutorial. And I thought a fun subject would be one of these antique gumball machines. So I have a few reference pictures here, and we'll make something like one of these two. Now, if you look on Google for antique gumball machine, there's actually a lot of variants. They're all a little bit different, but they all kind of have this same shape. Just between these two, the faceplate for the coin mechanism is completely different. And if you look online, you'll find a bunch more examples. If you look at these two, these little kind of pipes or columns or whatever that go up the side of the gumball machine are different. These ones are very thin and exaggerated, where these ones are kind of flatter and a little bit wider. So we don't have to be too specific, and this is going to be an 8-part tutorial series. In fact, I just finished recording it. I didn't know how many parts it would be up front, so I'm recording this intro now that it's complete. This was my final render from the tutorial series, so here is the gumball machine that we will be making from scratch in this tutorial series. And it's my first time, so it's a little bit rough around the edges. During the course of this tutorial, I did make a lot of mistakes. Now, this wasn't my first time making a gumball machine. I actually did a practice one before I started recording this. But even though this was my second time making this machine from scratch, I still made some mistakes. And I left all that in there. I explained what the mistakes were, and I explained how I fixed them. So hopefully that won't throw you off too far. Maybe you want to watch the whole video, or at least watch ahead a little bit before you do everything I do. So if you see me making a mistake, you can go straight to the fixed solution. Or you could just follow along and make the fixes as I go. Nothing is too egregious. If it was a terrible mistake, I probably would have just re-recorded the video, but there were a few mistakes that I made. So it's a little rough around the edges. I also was trying to, say what I was doing and which hotkeys I was pushing and all that type of stuff. But maybe sometimes I forgot to say something, or maybe sometimes I assumed that you already knew what that was, so I didn't repeat myself, and that might be unclear. I will definitely try to work on that in the future. But without further ado, let's begin making this gumball machine. I was trying to think about what I wanted to do, and there's a lot of other YouTube creators doing stuff in Blender, such as Blender Guru making donuts, CG Geek doing the ice cream, and CG Boost doing the apple basket or bowl. And so I thought for my first tutorial, I'd like to do one of these antique gumball machines. Now, unlike those other tutorials that advertise themselves as beginner tutorials, I'm going to say that this is probably more of an intermediate tutorial. The reason why is because I'm not going to spend the first video going over the basic controls of Blender. I might make a video about Blender basics, like how the window system works and how, manipulating objects and stuff work. But that's been covered a lot on YouTube. There's a lot of beginner series, and I kind of want to just get straight into making something. Realistically, if you've done any of the beginner tutorials, then you could jump in and get to work on this tutorial right away. This certainly isn't like that advanced. It's all basic Blender modeling techniques. It's nothing too crazy. And so, I'm not going to do all that beginner intro stuff, but I will, as I go, be saying which keyboard shortcuts I'm pressing and kind of explain what I'm doing every step of the way, and making sure that hopefully you can follow along and I don't skip any steps or I'm not confusing. So I got some reference images of this gumball machine, and so we're only going to use these 3. One thing is a lot of times when modeling, the first thing you'll do is put a reference image in the background of Blender. In this case, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to kind of eyeball it. I'm going to use measurements that I feel, I've already done this project once. Obviously, I wanted to make sure that I could do this before recording the tutorial. So I'm going to kind of use some of those same decisions I made already. And of course, I'll be telling you what those are as we go. But even the first time that I did this project, I just kind of eyeballed it, and I think it came out really good. So without further ado, let's hop over to Blender. Now, I am going to be using the Screencast Keys plugin. However, Blender has a problem where I think, so right now we're in the Layout tab, but if I were to go to like the UV Editing tab and then expand this, Screencast Keys, okay, it's still on. I don't know if it's gonna, is it actually screencasting anywhere? I don't know if I see it. So it says it's doing it, but I don't see it happening anywhere. What if I go over here? Oh, so it's right there. Is it happening in UV? Yeah, see, so like it's technically on. What if I merge these two? Yeah, so I don't see it happening in this viewport, but if we go to this one, you can see that it's displaying this, the keys there. So Blender 2.8 is still kind of new. The old plugin for Screencast Keys doesn't work too well. Now, I am using some recording software that I believe will be recording keyboard shortcuts, but it won't necessarily record some of the Blender specific ones. But as we go, I'll be kind of mentioning what I'm doing. So the first thing we want to do, let me just hide this menu, is we want to figure out, so one other thing I should mention is this video or this tutorial series will be in multiple parts. This is my first time recording a multiple part tutorial series. If you look at some of the earlier videos on my channel, I tend to do giant monolithic tutorials that are like an hour or 2 hours long, and I realize that's not good for YouTube. That's also not good for people wanting to learn Blender, because that's kind of a big commitment when you have to watch one video in one go, and so it's a lot more digestible. So for this first part, I'm going to try to create the base, not necessarily the faceplate. We'll see how far we get. And then in a future video, we'll probably do the faceplate and coin mechanism. And then we'll do the glass in the top. And then finally, we'll do physics and put all the gumballs in there. And then the final step will be to, adjust our materials and make everything look nice. So for this part, we're going to start with the base and see how far we get. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how is the best way to make this base and how many sides are there. And so just by looking at this picture and looking at this picture, I kind of decided this. We have 2 on the front, and most likely if you were to imagine the back side of this, there would be 1 here and 1 here on the far side of the gumball machine. And then it looks like there's 1 here and 1 here. So that means there'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's divided into 8. There's 8 of these vertical stripes. So the first thing we're going to do is add an octagon. And then from there, we'll use some modifiers and some edge loops to kind of turn it into the shape that we want here. So I'm going to delete that cube. And one other thing I should mention, I've mentioned in previous videos, I'm using a custom theme for Blender. I'm not a huge fan of Blender's dark theme. I'm also not a huge fan of Blender's light theme. I really like the old Blender, but 2.8 has 2 very contrasty themes. And so this is actually a theme that I made originally for the 2.7 series, and I adapted it for Blender 2.8. So your Blender, especially if you're just starting, will have different colors, but this is Blender 2.8. Everything will work the same, but I'm using a custom theme. All right, so let's add a circle. And if you go down to this menu here, it gives you the properties of your circle. So I want to start with an octagon. And from this octagon, we'll end up creating the shape of the gumball machine. So I want my octagon. This is, I think, a good size. It's about 2 Blender units. And I'm going to work in Blender units because I'm doing this basically by sight. I don't have this gumball machine in front of me. I can't measure it. I can't take real world measurements. I'm just going to be doing this by eye. And so for now, we have a 1 meter radius, which means a 2 meter or Blender unit diameter circle. That's fine. And we set it to be 8. Now I want this flat side to be on the front, because if we look at the gumball machine, there's these 2 lines here. And then there's this flat area between the 2. It's not really flat, but you'll see what I'm going to do. So I want to rotate this. Now, if I rotate it by 1/8, it would do, this corner would go to here because there's 8. So we want to rotate it by 1/16. So I'm going to get out a calculator and do 360 divided by 16. So we want to rotate it to 22.5 degrees. So with this circle selected, I'm going to hit R, and then I'm going to type 22, well, is it? Okay, there we go. Hit R, and then type 22.5. And as you can see, it's now perfectly flat, and that's exactly what we wanted. So now I want to make the basic curve, and I'm not too worried about the overall shape. So I'm going to go hit Tab to go into edit mode, and I'm just going to bring this up to about 2 units, and we'll change that later, but for now we're just going to do that. I'm going to hit 2 on the numbers above the keyboard, not the numpad, and go into edit mode. Go into edge mode in edit mode. And I want to select each one of these edges. And, if I were in vertex mode, for example, and I were to select these 2, when I would select the next edge, it would end up selecting this whole face. So by hitting 2 on the keyboard, we can just select edges and not faces, which is very handy. All right, and then we go to top view by pressing 7 on the number pad. And even though we can't see anything selected, it's just because we've selected vertical edges that from the top you can't really see. But what we're going to do is we're going to use the Bevel Tool, and we're going to very slightly bevel these edges. So hit Control B, and see how when we move the mouse, we create bevels. So we want them to be pretty small because this is where we're going to have those ridges along the sides of the Gumball machine. So this is pretty good, I think. If you look, where is it? Right down here, if you can see my mouse being highlighted at the bottom of the screen, you can see I'm using a value of, let's say something like that, 0.0646. So I'm going to click to apply that, and now we have this shape. So now what I'm going to do is put on subdivision surface, which will smooth things out. We'll do 2 in the viewport. And so we'll go out of edit mode with tab, right click, shade smooth. And so now we kind of have this shape where, go into wireframe, there's no real hard corners, but we also don't have this effect that we're looking for either. So let's go ahead and try to put that in there. So the first thing I want to do is we'll tackle the big area. So let's go into face mode. We'll go into solid mode. Press Z to pick your render mode, and press 3 on the keyboard to go to face mode. Alt A to deselect everything, and I'm just going to put 2 edge loops. Oops. In every single one of these. Now, when you're putting your edge loops, you right-click to cancel. So I'm going to hit Control R, use my scroll wheel to get 2 edge loops, left-click to place them, and right-click to cancel the movement. Now, my mouse is currently breaking, so sometimes my right-click button will register twice, as you saw there, and it's really frustrating because I get this menu. So if you wonder why I'm getting this menu, it's because I'm trying to right-click to cancel, and it's not working. So now we're in edge mode. Let's hit 3 to go to face mode and select just these faces we just created. I'm going to hit top view on the number pad, which is 7, and I'm going to hit S to scale and Shift Z to lock it on the Z axis. And I'm just going to bring these out to kind of create curves right there. All right, and the reason why you hit Shift Z, if you just hit scale, you'd see they get taller or shorter when you scale it. But if you hit S, Shift Z, you can scale, but the Z height will stay the same. So that's what we did there. Now we're going to go to where these more narrower gaps are and do the same exact thing. So Alt A to deselect, insert 2 edge loops. Then hit 3 for face mode, and we'll go select all of those inner faces. And, there are other ways you could be doing this. For example, we could be using like the spiral and array modifiers to create just 1/8 of this and then rotate it around. But this is easy enough. I think I'll just stick to this method. So from the top view, scale Shift Z, and just bring those out like that. And so now we're starting to have kind of the effect we want. It's still not perfect yet, but we're getting there. Now, to make these corners a little bit tighter, because right now, if we look, when we go into wireframe mode, it's a very soft transition between this curve and then this little bump here. And if we look at the actual Gumball machine, we can see that that should be a corner almost. It should be a very pinched transition. It shouldn't be a smooth transition. And the way that subdivision surface works is the closer any two edges or faces are, the tighter the pinch will be. So let's go back into solid mode and you'll see what I mean. So if I take an edge loop here and I pull it to that corner, and I take an edge loop here and I pull it to that corner, you end up with a much tighter corner. And we can do the same thing over here and the same thing over here. And so now it kind of has that look that we want where it, comes to a pinch right where those edges are. But there's two problems with doing it this way. The first is that you're doing it by hand. So you have to enter, edge loops and then drag them close to the corner, which means every time you do it, you might drag it slightly differently. And there are ways to prevent that, but there's a much easier way where we can consistently make them all the same. So I'm just going to select each one, or I'm going to hit 2 to go into edge mode and select each one of these edges. And I'll probably fast forward this in the editing, so you should see this super quick. All right, so now we have all the edges selected. And once again, we'll go into top view and Control B and just bevel them very slightly, just tiny amount, just like that. And now we have all of them mathematically exactly the same. And we have these little pinched out areas. So we're doing good so far. So the next thing that we want to kind of think about is, now that we have the correct shape, we want to make it taper, curve around on the top, and then we also want to create the space where it expands out a little bit. And one thing that it also does is it turns into a circle on the bottom, so you can kind of see like the bottom of the shape doesn't have these same crazy curves. It looks to be one consistent round shape. So we're already at 16 minutes for this first video, so I think we can get that done, and then I'll probably do in the next video the gumball area, the dispenser area, as well as the coin mechanism. So that's where we'll leave off. So let's see how much we can do here. So like I said, I feel like for the base, let's go into edit mode, and I'm just going to scale everything down just a little bit, probably to about there. So I like to use the Blender grid when I'm like kind of looking at my measurements. And so we can see there's these major lines, and I scaled everything down so there's 1 unit on both sides. And I feel like that's pretty good. I'm going to go into vertex mode. I'm going to Alt-A to deselect everything, Alt-Z to go into X-ray mode, and select these top bits. And first we'll scale these down. So I feel like these should go to maybe right there. So we'll say there's 1 unit on the bottom and there's 2 units worth of space on the top. So if we turn off our X-ray mode, we kind of have an object that looks like this. There's a slight taper, and there's a slight taper here. It's not an aggressive taper. We can see that it does taper on these 2 machines, but it's not a super aggressive taper. If you were just doing this from memory, you might say it should be something like this, but, I think that's pretty good. Maybe the bottom can come out a little bit more. Let's turn on X-ray so we get all our vertices. Maybe a little bit more, but I think that's pretty good. All right. And now what we want to do is create the top part where these kind of curve in. So I'm going to deselect everything, select this edge loop. And I'm going to think about the best way to do this. Well, I think the best way first is just to extrude up a bit. with Z so that it's straight up. And then I'm just going to scale this in just a little bit. And I'm going to extrude again, scale it in just a little bit. Then I'm going to hit Control I and then H to hide everything else. And then from the top view, I kind of want to turn this into a circle. So I'm going to hit C for circle select and or brush select and get all of these guys. There we go. And then I'm just going to scale them in till they're about there. Deselect everything, circle select, get all of these. And you don't have to use circle select, you can use whatever selection method that you're comfortable with. I just use that. And then let's bring those into about there. It's not a perfect circle, but it'll do. And now if we hit Alt H, we unhide everything. And perfect. We can see like how those kind of come to a stop. And then what we'll do is we'll take this inner circle, extrude it again, grab it on Z and bring it down just a little bit, extrude on Z again. And so now we have that inner lip. And you know what? I feel like, let's see, how does it look like? Yeah, we could probably even bring like, let's say, let's see how this looks. If we take these ones and bring them down a bit. Yeah, I kind of like that a little bit better. So let's do that. So let's take every one of these, just so there's a little bit more interesting curves going on. There we go. And bring them down just a bit. Yes, I like that a lot. I think that looks pretty good. Because you can see these do kind of curve, but then they kind of stop once they get to that inner lip. And I feel like if we take this ring and hit Control plus a couple times, we'll get all of these outer rings. I'm just going to scale Shift Z and make that a little bit tighter. There we go. And I'll put an edge loop here. You can see how when I, right now this curve falls off very quickly, but as we add an edge loop, it'll tighten that curve so we have more of a round curve up here, which I think looks better. All right, so now we just have to do the bottom, and that will be that for this video. So, front view, hit Tab for edit mode, make sure we're in vertex select mode, Alt A to deselect everything, Alt Z for X-ray, select the bottom ones. And let's see, what's the best way to do this? Well, I think I actually want to bring this up a bit. So grab Z, I'm going to make it, I want the bottom of it to be about 2 units, I think. So we'll bring that up just a little bit. I think the curve still looks okay, the taper. So I'm going to extrude. I'm going to hold Z, or tap Z, and then bring it down to 0. Doesn't have to be perfectly 0. We can also go into N and item the median point for Z. We'll just put in 0, and now all of those vertices are at 0. And then I think I can just extrude everything. So go into face mode, hold Alt to select this face loop, hit 7 on the numpad for the top view, extrude, right click to place it, scale Shift Z, and then bring these out to just about there. So they're just a little bit bigger than the 2 square units. And obviously you can see we have a problem here. It curves very awkwardly, but we can fix that up. So I'm going to hit Control R to put an edge loop in and just bring it all the way down to about there. And then on this side, we'll hit Control R to put an edge loop and tighten that up. Same thing on the bottom. And that looks really good. The only thing that I want to do is go into face mode and just grab these faces. Got to remember to hold Shift because I forgot to. There we go. And this is something that, you know, I figured out last time I was doing this. So you select these faces, hit grab with Z, and just bring those up a little bit. So now you can see this kind of bends down but still follows the same shape. So that looks pretty good. So if we hit 1 for front view, in the next episode we'll be cutting out a door here and extending this piece to create the place where you grab the gumballs from. But one last thing I want to try to do in this episode is get the circle along the bottom, because it does turn into a circle. If you look here, it does turn into a round circle. So let's see if we could figure out the best way to recreate that. I think the easiest thing is going to be to select this face loop. I'm going to exaggerate it, so I'm going to extrude, right click to place it, scale Shift Z until it's very large. Then I'm going to go into X-ray mode, into vertex mode, and we want to turn this into a circle. Now, there are some tools in Blender to turn an arbitrary shape into a circle, but they sometimes have side effects. We could try it here. So if we select this edge loop, right click, go to loop tools and choose circle, it'll create a circle, but it also rotates it a bit. And so I don't really want to have to deal with that rotation. So I will manually do this. And so what we're going to do is start by taking circle select, getting all of these guys. And because we have X-ray mode on, you are selecting the ones that are directly underneath as well. All right, and let's just scale these out until probably till about there. And then we'll scale the other ones out and we'll be pretty close to circle. So deselect everything, get these ones. And I'll show you a trick too, actually, which maybe I should have done first, but whatever. So scale Shift Z. All right, that looks pretty circular. But what we can do is in edit mode, create a circle and give it a ton of vertices. We'll do 256. Doesn't really matter. We're not going to use this for anything later, but scale this out to about here. And then when you're in edit mode for this one, you can kind of see where you've gone off circle, right? So this should probably be a little bit closer there. So let's take these again and scale in, but what we'll do is we'll use proportional editing and just change this so it's something like that. All right, so now our base looks pretty circle. We can turn off proportional editing, turn off X-ray mode, and now, actually we'll leave X-ray mode on. We'll just select this entire outer ring, scale Shift Z, and bring it in close. All right, so now we have that kind of circular base. The only thing left to do is tighten it up. So we'll add an edge loop going this way, like that. And there we go. What we can do for this inside part, I'm going to select this, delete all of these vertices, then take one of these circular edges, extrude, oops, turn off proportional editing, scale that in, scale it in, and hit F to fill that in. So now we have a base, and we can do more stuff with that base later. I can see that there's a little bit of a problem here. I think these might be at different heights. So I'm going to go into X-ray mode, and I'm going to select with box select everything. Whoops. Scale Z 0. There we go. Perfect. I guess one last thing. We're at 30 minutes. I was hoping this would be 20 minutes, but I did kind of do a little bit of an intro. We can delete this reference circle now. Of course, save our file. I'm going to call this base. We'll rename this collection called Gumball Machine, because later on we'll have a collection for lights and camera and stuff. And we'll just put a placeholder material here. So with the base selected in the materials tab, we'll just call this red paint. I'm going to expand this viewport display property. We'll give it a nice red color for now. Not too bright. I actually like it on the darker side, a little bit desaturated. And if you click and drag this color, you can scroll down and drop that in viewport display, and then you'll get the red there. Maybe a little bit brighter. Let's see. Something like that, but still kind of desaturated. And I can bring this paint up to there. Okay, so that does it for the first video. We're exactly at 29 minutes, 50 seconds. See you next time.